Hello and welcome to the Algal Turf Scrubber lecture. So algal turf scrubbers are basically, it's a biomimicry of symbiotic algae and coral. So basically it's algae that grow attached to some sort of mesh surface, and basically they form a turf, like a lawn. And what these algae do, what the algal biomass does, is it scrubs pollutants from the water that passes over it and secures it into their biomass. So this is an example of the algal biomass. So this would be biomass ready for harvest. This would be as it's growing on the mesh. So it was designed by Dr. Walter Addy, actually here at the Smithsonian in DC. He was actually designing, studying corals. And his main goal, his original goal, was to help maintain water quality in a large aquarium. And but other uses he was thinking was groundwater remediation, bioenergy, sewage treatment, and whatnot. So basically what he did was in the 1970s, he actually was studying algal ridges and bank barrier reefs in the Caribbean. And so he was looking at these algal ridges in the Caribbean, and then basically was like, well, wait a second, if algae does this in the natural environment, can I use this to remove pollutants using a controlled algal production? And this leap is kind of the essence of ecological engineering, taking something that's naturally happening in the environment and using it to benefit humans in terms of purification of contaminated groundwaters, a tertiary treatment of sewage, etc. So here's his early algal research. Again in the Caribbean, where he was basically letting the water flow over these algal mats, and then those mats would be periodically harvested, and that algae could then be utilized. So this is the patent, again in 1982, where basically he patented for this kind of mesh screen, where this filamented algae grows on the mesh, and then there's basically, it grows through it and creates that turf. And here again, the different turf species that they have. This is again from the patent application. So the inputs is going to be solar energy, eutrophic water, and again, some sort of wave action usually to kind of increase the surface area and the surface contact as it goes down the turf scrubber runway, the raceway. The outputs being cleaner water, less nitrogen, phosphorus that gets taken up, oxygenation. So again, the water that is oxygenated as it moves through the turf scrubber. It removes CO2 from the atmosphere within the algal biomass, it's photosynthesis. It also can trap sediments in that algal biomass substrate. And then that algal biomass is harvested on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And you can use that algal biomass as a value-added product. So this is an example of kind of a unit that Dr. Kangas actually in our department was using for different testing. So this actually, I believe this unit was with Exelon Energy, and they were actually doing it out of an outflow from a nuclear power plant with the idea that the warm water could be used year round for in Maryland, where again, normally when we operate ours, we close them down in early December just because if the pipes freeze up. But again, this had this wave, this tipping bucket action that went through, and then it kind of goes down, and then the algal biomass is grown. Here's large ones. This is Hydromentia. It's actually a company in Florida that does these large ATS projects. So this is again a large project where you actually have the biomass coming here. You can see the algae here. And then they basically harvest it on a large scale. So this is manual harvesting here with just these little sweepers where you can just sweep it down, or they also can harvest it with little tractors, kind of like a little squeegee that goes through. So this is actually Dr. Kangas actually talking about the Susquehanna River, where he's looking at, again, this simple advice. And this is Dr. Addy as well, who did it. They were looking at a muddy run facility. And again, cleaning up the water with the algal turf scrubber before it gets back into the Susquehanna River. Here's another one that they use in Maryland Eastern Shore. This was actually a runoff from a poultry facility. And here they actually had solar energy to run the pumps. And so they were able to run the pumps and clean up the water using the solar energy. Here's again, these are set up in Dr. Kangus's lab. We had them in different iterations, but again, you can see they have grow lights here in the lab, and they just have, it just gets pumped through and going through and then harvesting the algae that's created here on this mat. And here's kind of a harvest at one of these large, smaller scale ones. And so that's the whole mat. You can just take it off the mesh screen. Again, this is one that they did. This is actually a Dr. Walter Marbury. This is one where they were looking at dairy manure runoff and actually using dairy manure runoff and growing algae from that as well. So back, we're going to go through the hydromentia projects and go through one in Florida to get an estimate of these very large scale ones. So this was a one that was from their report. The algal turf scrubber treatment system itself was about $2 million. The pump station and all the conveyances and the piping was about $1 million. With their operating cost, again, was about $300,000. And again, it took about a year and a half from their notice to proceed to complete complete construction. So again, this is again from their report, their findings. So again, they had drought conditions at the very beginning, which limited the effectiveness in reducing the phosphorus concentrations. But afterwards, they had very high phosphorus uptake. And, but again, they were very good at moving nitrogen, but not as well at moving phosphorus with this specific system that was treating water in Florida from Taylor Creek. But again, they removed more than 800 pounds per acre during the first year. So again, this is the pumping and conveyance system here. So here's the water going from Taylor Creek. So it gets pumped through onto this very large algal turf scrubber. And it goes through the turf scrubber here, and then it comes here to this collection point after it's gone through the turf scrubber. From this collection point, basically it's filtered out. And so any algae residue is that goes over the slough is filtered out. But most of the algae is going to be here growing in this mesh. And so they take this kind of large squeegee machine, like a lawnmower, it looks like, but with a squeegee on it. And they basically harvest all of this. And this is it, that it's been harvested, and the water is keeps going. And so this is kind of right before harvest. And so if you look a little bit on their P removal, so their phosphorus removal rate of, so this is in grams per meter squared per year. And so what you can see is the Patterson wastewater ATS, which is a wastewater treatment algal turf scrubber, actually is able to remove about 100 or more than 100, looks like almost 500 pounds of, or grams of nitrogen per meter squared per year. And this is with a quite loading weight of about 1,000. So it's not removing all of it, but it's removing around 500 of 1,000 loading rate. Again, if we look at kind of 100, the loading rate here, that would be removing all of it. So again, we're looking at about a 70% removal rate here as you're moving through, as the loading rate goes down. Again, this is looking at submerged aquatic vegetation versus the algal turf scrubbers, where you're harvesting on a weekly basis, and thus the removal rates are much higher, plus their loading rates are much higher. So this is what you might get in a natural background, loading one gram per meter squared per year. And here's where we're able to get with the algal turf scrubbers. So just a little idea on the phosphorus removal. So if we look at stormwater treatment, and this is just a stormwater treatment area. So again, their rate was 1.2 grams per meter squared per year. But if we look at some different ATS technologies, we have anywhere from 25 to 92 grams per meter squared per year removal rate. And so if we look at the nitrogen removal rate, so again, we're looking at inflow nitrogen anywhere from 2,000. And again, being able to remove a lot of that, again, removing 500 of that. So again, as we get these higher loading rates, they are, again, removing quite a bit of it, not all of it. But again, if you're looking at a 4,000 loading rate, we're able to remove about 1,700 of that. So a little over half of the nitrogen coming in is removed through the algal biomass. And so if we look at about effective treatment area with treatment wetlands to get that same amount of 350 tons of nitrogen removed, you would need about 4,000 acres of wetlands. With the algal turf scrubber, because you're harvesting on a weekly basis, this is in Florida, you're able to only do it through 109 acres versus 4,000 acres with wetlands. So the product, again, there's various things you can do with the product. So this is actually showing examples of maybe doing algal biofuel with the product. You can actually make it into this is actually the fertilizer product they've dried and made into a compost material. You can also use it for feed. So this is animal feed for dairy. So I'm going to show you an example of, this is a paper that was published again by Walter Mawbury, looking at this algal biomass for dairy treatment and using it as a slow release fertilizer. So here's Dr. Kangas with Dr. Mawbury with the algal turf scrubber here that was treating dairy manure at the USDA Beltsville Center here in Maryland. And so if they looked at the nitrogen and phosphorus, so what actually they harvested, again, it had a lot more nitrogen than phosphorus in the algae itself, which is expected. About 2.5% the percent of the biomass was about 2.5% nitrogen, about 0.24% phosphorus. And then in the green water and the slough, they also saw some nitrogen and phosphorus there as well. If you look at the dissolved oxygen, again, what was coming in was quite low in dissolved oxygen, so 4% dissolved oxygen, which is only a 57% saturation rate. But by the time it went to the bottom, it was 11 milligrams per liter dissolved oxygen, which is super saturated. So it came in with a very low saturated, low water quality, because again, this was coming off parlor wastewater from dairy manure. And so it was very low water quality. And actually the oxygen rate was increased. So again, if this was discharged, it would have a much higher oxygenation rate. In terms of the algal biomass, so again, this is a system in Maryland. And so you can see that the algal biomass is the total weight of the algal biomass. We can see that during the, it was first starting up here. And then again, it really took off and we saw really high algal biomass, grams per meter squared per day. This is dry weight in the summer months. But again, it went back off during the winter time. It was much lower. If we look at net productivity, so again, this is different studies. And so they saw this is again the net productivity, the dry weight grams dry weight per meter squared per day. You can see that we're anywhere from 14 to 11 of grams of dry weight biomass is actually, so again, anytime biomass is created, that's CO2 that's being sequestered. And so this biomass that's being created is much greater than what we would see in submerged aquatic vegetation, phytoplankton, or emergent marshes, which are again just an order of magnitude lower than what we see in these controlled systems where we're constantly harvesting. So I'm going to show you two videos of algal turf scrubbers that are at the Port of Baltimore that is part of a project that I was involved in, as well as Dr. May. And we actually use the algae for anaerobic digestion. And so we'll talk about this more during class, but I'm going to end here with these two videos, and then we'll have further discussion on algal turf scrubber technology in class. So thank you very much for listening, but wait for the videos. The first video is Voice of America. And so I will let, I think Dr. May start speaking. I'll let her take it from here.
This is an algal turf scrubber, it's a trade name. We're calling it an algal flowway technology. And it is a technology that is ecologically engineered to use algae to strip nutrients and sediment out of a water body. This technology allows you to use the forces of nature, if you will, sunlight, photosynthesis, gravity flow. We're pumping water from the river, and so that water, as it pulses down the flowway, stimulates algal attachment on the flowway, essentially creating a controlled algal bloom on land, which put the algae to work, pulling nutrients out of the water body and then creating algal biomass. which then needs to be harvested in order to remove those nutrients and the sediment and carbon. You would need to harvest it. So algae grows very fast. It's the fastest growing organism on the planet. So we harvest this about every week. That algae is collected on the flowway, and at the end we have a large mass of algae that we're producing every week. What do we do with that algae? You have to have an end use, otherwise you're going to pile that algae up very quickly.
So this is algae that we took off the turf scrubber, and what we're doing with this algae, this is biomass, that again, nutrients from the bay, there's too much nutrients in the bay, the algae love it, the algae take up the nutrients in the biomass, but then once you've harvested this algae, the question is, what are you going to do with it? We actually put it into an anaerobic digestion system. In that digestion process, the bacteria break down this carbon material and they produce methane biogas, methane enriched biogas. So we collect this biogas, and then the biogas is used to run a fuel cell. The fuel cell is actually a very efficient way of using the energy. So we use the biogas, and that fuel cell can be used anywhere you need to put electricity in. But as you scale up, we have systems that are 2 megawatts, 3 megawatts, very large systems using this anaerobic digestion process. All you have to do is make the vessels bigger and put more materials inside.
Over wetlands, treatment wetlands, rain gardens, bioswales, you name it, this will extract more nutrients per unit area when it's running than any of those other systems. Very efficient at doing what it does.
Okay, we have one more video. So this video is from the Big Ten Network. So this is actually shown at commercials sometimes in the basketball games and whatnot when we used to play sports live. So we'll show this one now. This is just a minute. The aha moment was, why can't we use that for energy production? In the Chesapeake Bay, there's actually too many nutrients in the water. We get a large amount of algae produced. That algae dies and it takes away the oxygen. Our pilot project uses the algae to clean the water from the ammonia and the phosphates. We breed the algae on site. We provide a mesh screen so that it has a surface to attach to. We're taking out nutrients by harvesting algae, but then what do we do with it? Back in the lab, we basically optimize the process of taking this algae and creating methane to power a fuel cell. The goal of this project is the widespread use of this integrated system, both in the US and across the world. We're taking a process that's more about water quality and combining it with a renewable energy issue in a way that hasn't really been done before. All right, so that's the end of the Algal Turf Scrubber lecture. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in class. This will be discussed on Thursday. Thank you.